There are 12 notes in Western music that are named using the letters A through G. The notes with a letter are called naturals. The rest of them are what's called accidentals. These can be named sharp or flat, depending whether you're raising the note below it or lowering the note above it. For example, in between A and B, if we were to raise A, we would get A sharp, and if we were to lower B, we would get B flat. This will make more sense later, but for now, know that we can call them sharp or flat. You'll see that in between B and C, and E and F, there are no accidentals, and that is because everything's fine. Just don't worry about it. It will all make sense later. Our 12 notes repeat endlessly, up and down, higher and lower, into the cosmos. And this is easy to observe when you bring it over to a piano, where our white keys are the naturals and the black keys are our accidentals. But when we bring things over to a guitar fretboard, at first glance, it can be a bit more overwhelming, since now, in addition to moving left and right, we're able to move up and down. All we need to keep in mind, though, is that this is a sequence of 12 notes that repeats. So as long as we understand how to navigate within that, then we'll just need to know how to stick them all together. If we take a look at the way the guitar is tuned, we can see the direction of movement that it encourages. After moving to the side for a few spaces, we have the option to take this A note up and over. This continues on until we reach our high E string, which gives us 2 repetitions of our 12-note sequence that we can reach without moving our hand. Once we mirror the notes from our low E string onto our high E, we can see that our A note appears to travel in an upwards diagonal motion. When we fill in the remaining notes up until the 12th fret, we get a clear picture of the direction of movement that the guitar seems to encourage. It almost paints us a little arrow here. Then, as we know from earlier, once we hit 12 spaces, everything repeats. Now that we understand our fretboard's layout, let's simplify it by applying patterns to figure out which notes go with which keys and how to build chords from them. We can find everything we need by using the major scale. We can build this using a formula of tones and semitones. We can imagine tones are 2 spaces and semitones are 1. You might hear these referred to as whole notes instead of tones and half notes instead of semitones. As we've seen, once we reach a total of 12 spaces, the sequence then repeats. We can reference these tones and semitones numerically using numbers 1 through 7. These can be written using Roman numerals so we can denote a difference between those with capital letters and those with lowercase. We'll explore that further later. Our numbers 1 through 7 are called scale positions. In between these scale positions are what are called blue notes. We can think of these as optional ingredients that can change the mood and colour of a key. These are what give jazz and blues their distinct character and feel, which is typically done by adding in a flattened 3rd, 5th, or 7th. Exotic, fancy scales are built by either including blue notes or replacing normal scale positions with them, so rather than learning a variety of scales with no framework to stick them to, if we understand the framework, then we can easily make small, conscious adjustments to unlock them all at any time. So let's see how we can apply this in practice. Imagine as if we're building a stamp, and we'll leave it just as it is with the regular major scale. All we'll need to do is make sure that the 1 in our stamp is lined up with whichever note we want to be in the key of. When we line up the 1 with A, we can see the notes in the A major scale, or in the key of A, and these are A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, and G sharp. We can then simply move the same shape along to B to find that we have B, C sharp, D sharp, E, F sharp, G sharp, and A sharp in the key of B. And finally, if we move it down into C, we find that we have all natural notes here, or as we know, all the white keys on the piano. We also know our major scale positions repeat. Often the scale positions in the second cycle extend past 7, so you may hear people use ninths, tenths, and elevenths. They're still talking about 2s, 3s, and 4s, they're just making it clear which ones they are. As you can imagine, if we were to build a stamp to go across the entire fretboard, we could, but it would be a bit overwhelming at first. So let's simplify it and separate it into pieces. Each scale position has its own chord that can be found using a simple 3-note formula. These will be called major, minor, or diminished. Here is where we use our Roman numerals. The capital letters indicate majors, the lowercase are minors, apart from the 7th, which is always a diminished chord, which just means it's a bit weird. Major chords are typically happier, whereas minor chords are associated more with sadness. But context is everything. The note that follows will give new meaning to the previous one. Each chord in the key has a unique energy and emotional resonance. Different combinations or progressions create new dynamics. The diminished 7th, for example, if left unresolved, will leave a feeling of tension and unease. But when we follow it, by moving it up to the 1st, it makes things feel so warm and comforting, as if you've returned home. You may notice that many songs sound similar. It's because they're all using safe, predictable progressions specifically built into music to create that energy. We can make our first chord by combining the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes together. This will make a major chord, and like our scales, this is a framework that can be adjusted to add character. With this formula, we could add the 7 to give this more of a soulful, jazzy feel, or take one of the notes away for more of a rocky power chord. Our second chord is minor. Even though it keeps using the same spacing as the first, it's where that pattern starts in our overall sequence that determines the feeling it gives. When we start from the 2, we use the 2, 4, and 6. If we move it to the 3rd note, we have our 3rd chord, a minor chord using 3, 5, 7. Our 4th chord uses a 4, 6, 1. If we were to lay it out within one sequence, which we can call an octave, it looks as if it's a new pattern. But when we add a second octave on and use the one from there instead, we can see that it's the same. Playing the same notes from a chord in a different order is called an inversion. Our 5th chord is a major chord. It uses 5, 7, 2. 6, 1, 3 is our minor 6th chord, and 7, 2, 4 is our diminished 7th. Even though they sound very different, diminished chords still use the same pattern. Like chords, the scales themselves can have the same notes played from different starting points. Instead of inversions, these are called modes. The tonal center changes, where it feels like home, and it gives a new perspective to the same sequence. The modes each have their own names. They might sound a little strange at first, but you'll get used to them. If we root our major scale in our first position, we will be in what's called Ionian. Our second mode, starting from our second position, is Dorian. Third is Phrygian, fourth is Lydian, and the fifth is called Mixolydian. Our sixth mode is Aeolian, and this one is also what's known as the relative minor scale. We can think of it as the emotional opposite of its major counterpart, the dark to the light. Although they share the same notes, their homes feel like they're on opposite sides of the energetic spectrum. Our last mode, from our seventh position, is Locrian. Let's see how this translates to the guitar. To make things easy, let's find C and make that our 1, so we know that we're just looking for the natural notes. We also know from its tuning that we're encouraged to move up in a hand's width block, so instead of going all the way to F on the low E string, let's find it on the A and continue from there. Instead of going all the way to B, we'll move that up to the D string. We can continue this until we complete 2 octaves, and then we can use the high E string to keep the direction flowing and end up with a shape that we can call Ionian. Within this mode, we have all 7 of our chords. We're able to find our 1-3-5s, our 2-4-6s, 3-5-7s, 4-6-1s, 5-7-2s, 6-1-3s, and our 7-2-4s. When we play these notes individually, instead of strumming them together as a full chord, we have what's called an arpeggio. Just like the major scale, this shape works like a stamp, moving side to side, with the one note always telling us which key we're in. Now that we have a shape for Ionian, we can apply what we already know from the major scale to figure out the second, Dorian. We know that every note has a space in between them except for 3 and 4 and 7 and 1. So this would leave us with this shape for Dorian, which will also have all of our chords. We can continue doing this to find the shapes of Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, Locrian, and then back to Ionian. These 7 shapes connect together like a puzzle and will continue to do so endlessly. Let's go back to our fretboard and test this out using note names. If we find D and make this our 2, and continue the same exercise we did when starting from C, this matches what we just found for Dorian. We can find the same thing for Phrygian when starting from our 3rd position, E. Since we're at the 12th fret, we can also play this same shape in our open position. If we continue there from this F and make this our 4th, we'll find our Lydian shape. Mixolydian follows next when starting from G. Then we can find our Aeolian shape at A. If we do the exercise one last time, starting from B, we can see our Locrian shape that connects neatly back into C, Ionian. So all we need to do is learn these 7 shapes and understand how they connect. Then we can find every chord interval and arpeggio in every key anywhere on the fretboard. And we can simplify it even further. Now that we've solved the side-to-side horizontal puzzle, let's solve the up and down vertical one. So if we look at our fretboard, we know from the tuning that something happens with this B note. It looks like this is where we get the angled step that encourages us to move up and over instead of just straight movements up. If we keep this marker and bring in our mode shapes, we can observe a very interesting pattern. Let's start with Ionian and take away the bottom row. We'll let this fall down, but when a row crosses the marker, let's move it over one space. When we do this, we end up with our Lydian shape, which just needs the high E added to continue the movement. We can do this again and take away the bottom row and watch how Locrian will fall down across the marker. When we take out this bottom row, Phrygian will fall down. Then we have Aeolian, followed by Dorian, and then by Mixolydian. Now when we take out this bottom row, we end up once again returning to Ionian. So there is a stack of rows that are associated with each scale position which runs vertically. And this sequence, like our horizontal one, repeats endlessly. So a mode shape is the crossing point where a horizontal puzzle intersects with a vertical one. This means if we just learn the sequence of these 3-note clusters and how they fall into our shapes, then we'll always know where we can move vertically and how to link our strings together. In every mode, the order of our clusters will always remain the same. If we can imagine being able to see outside the bounds of the guitar, we can visualize our intersection playing out. Imagine our vertical sequence is rotating around and repositioning itself as it highlights each of our mode shapes going down along the fretboard. This vertical sequence is particularly helpful with chords and arpeggios. Instead of needing to learn separate chord shapes for each mode, we just need to know where the chord's scale positions are within the clusters and where the clusters fall in the stack. We can visualize our first chord vertically like this with our 1-3-5s, and then find our second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh chords. So we can simplify everything down to these 7 mode shapes and these 7 vertical chord patterns. And we can take this one step further. Let's observe how our highlighted dots move up through this sequence. If we ignore the spacing in our clusters and look at things as left, middle, right, we can see that we have another pattern. In the row aligned with the chord's root note, we have a left and a right. Then we have 2 up the middle, leading to another row of a left and a right. This row lines up with the second note of the chord, in this case, the 3. We then have a diagonal line that moves right to left, returning to our root line again. Now wouldn't it be amazing if this pattern lined up with all of our chords? If we move it next to our 2, we can see that the rows with the left and right align with the first and second notes of the chord again. In this case, it's the 2 and 4. We also have our connecting line coming up the middle and then diagonally, right to left, back to the root. This happens again for the third chord with our 3 and 5. And for our fourth chord with the 4 and 6. It happens again for the fifth chord, lining up with the 5 and 7. And for our sixth chord with the 6 and 1. And finally, even for our diminished seventh chord, the same pattern lines up with the 7 and 2. So all of guitar can be simplified down into 7 shapes and 1 master chord pattern. I've created a PDF with all of these shapes, patterns and sequences. It's available for download through the link in this video's description, along with information about exercises to properly absorb and integrate all of this into your playing.